Welcome to Raising Daughters, the podcast that helps parents learn the best ways to support their daughters as they navigate the high levels of stress, anxiety, pressure, and uncertainty so pervasive in our culture today. Dr. Tim Jordan is a developmental and behavioral pediatrician who has specialized in counseling girls for over 30 years and sheds light on the realities of today's young women in all facets of their lives. This is your opportunity to learn how to better support your daughters, making them feel safe, secure, and truly loved in the midst of life's ups and downs. Here is your host, Dr. Tim.
Hey friends, Dr. Tim Jordan back here with a new episode of Raising Daughters. And I want to give a shout out really quickly before I start to all my listeners who live in Australia and Ireland in particular, because after the United States, those are the two countries where I have the most listeners. So thank you so much. You guys live a long ways away. So I appreciate you tuning into this podcast every week. And I'm going to talk today about a topic that I think a lot of you will resonate with. It's about nagging, and mostly about why parents nag. I think most of us probably know at some level that it's not very effective. I had a dad in my office not too long ago who was complaining about his daughter. And he said, I have to tell her, 5 times at least. And I end up raising my voice, and then she finally responds to what I want her to do. And so I let him know that he's done an incredible job of training his daughter to need 5 reminders and to hear his octave and his tone go up, and then he means business. So when I hear those kinds of stories from parents, I pretty much have learned over the many years I've counseled kids that the parents are at big fault there. They've not been good with their boundaries. They have not followed through, in a kind but firm way and immediately. And they've allowed their kids to learn that they don't really mean business until the 5th or 6th time. So, and the other part about the nagging thing is that it's draining. It makes parenting not feel very fun. You end up having to do more talking, and you have to do more reminding, and you have to end up doing more for your kids and things that they should be doing for themselves. So I want to talk mostly today about what's going on for parents that's causing them to nag. In other words, oftentimes there are stories below the surface that are being triggered that cause us to be extra worried, extra into our kids' business, which oftentimes ends up looking like nagging. And a lot of times those stories are below the surface, meaning they're subconscious. You're not aware of those in those moments. So what are parents really saying underneath their nagging, underneath their upset, underneath their anger? Again, something below the surface. Let me give you a quick example. I was giving a talk years ago at an all-girls high school. It was at the beginning of the school year. And I was talking to the parents of freshman girls. And so, and actually the girls were there for the beginning part. And then I stayed with the parents, and then the girls went with, I think, the school counselor to do something. So I had the parents for maybe an hour. And one of the things we were supposed to do was come up with some things that were bothering the parents about their daughters and vice versa. Things that their parents were doing that irritate, upset their daughters. Anyway, so I remember one of the dads, I asked the question, what's something that's frustrating you with your freshman high school daughter? And one dad raised his hand. He said, I've got one. He said, my daughter is always up in her room. She likes to keep the door closed. She's up there doing God only knows what. She's on her phone, talking to her friends, blah, blah. And I don't like it. She's up in her room too much. And so I had a mom who was transcribing on a board. We were making a list to show the girls later. So she started to write, and I said, wait a minute, don't write that yet. So I said to the dad, sounds like you're frustrated because your daughter's spending a lot of time in her room. Is that right? He said, yes. I said, what's your concern about that? He said, well, the rest of the family's downstairs, and we're playing board games, we're doing some fun things together, and she's up in her room, and she's not doing stuff with the family. She's up there all the time talking to her friends. So I said, okay. And mom started to write. I said, don't write yet. So I said, it sounds like what I hear you saying is that you're frustrated because the rest of the family is doing things together, and she's up in her room and she's missing out of doing family time with you guys. Is that what you're saying? He said, yes. And I said, what's your concern about that? And then he paused, kind of went inside, if you will. Then he said, I think what I'm concerned about is I miss my daughter. Pay dirt. I told him, write that on the board. So the nagging and being on her about being in a room and all that. The real issue wasn't that she was in a room. The real issue was he felt disconnected from her. That would have been a much more valuable lead-in to having a conversation with his daughter than whamma, 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 wham. So I hope you get the idea. That's what I'm talking about, is there's something below the surface that might be triggering you to do the nagging and being on your kids too much. Let me give you several more examples. I think it'll make it more clear. And also, I think you might find yourself in some of these stories. Another similar story, by the way, before I go on. There's a mom in my office not too long ago, and she was on her daughter a lot, and she was crabbing at her and picking at her and all this stuff. And I think what they came to realize was this mom also felt disconnected. And she felt like the only time she got any kind of connection with her daughter was when she started to nag at her. She started to pick at her. And their daughter, of course, didn't like it. They ended up in arguments, but unconsciously, for the mom, that connection was better than none. And that made a lot of sense to me and to the mom and to the daughter. I had a mom years ago who, I remember, I've had this story more than once, a mom pushing her daughter to be more outgoing. And in essence, she was saying she's too shy. This girl, I think at the time was in like third grade. We go to like this a birthday party with girls who are in her class at school, and she's clinging onto my legs. She doesn't want me to leave. We go to any new place, and she's doing the same thing. I noticed at school, if I'm up there with events in the classroom, that she's off by herself, like she's very quiet. And so this mom had been pushing this girl to talk more, to introduce herself, et cetera, et cetera. And the girl was shrinking every time her mom did that. So when I talked to the mom, I asked her about her story a little bit, and the mom related that she had been really shy as a little girl as well, really shy, to the point where she said, I didn't really have many friends in school. I felt so self-conscious about introducing myself to people. I was always worried about what people thought about me, and so I stayed really quiet. I'm just kind of quiet by nature. And she said, I felt like I missed out a lot because I didn't really have a good friend group. And times when I could have gone to things, I didn't because I was so worried. I was too shy. And she said, and I don't want that for my daughter. Hate her. So because of her story, she didn't want her daughter to live through what she had. So she was on her daughter. And she was, and I find this a lot, she was putting her story too much into her daughter's story. Her daughter was somewhat shy. She was a slow to warm kind of kid, but she wasn't like too shy. She was just slow to warm. And there was lots of stories that her mom could tell me about where if given the time, she did warm up and then she would talk and she would, integrate with the kids. But the mom was bringing extra energy and she was nagging and reminding and all this because of her story that was getting intermingled with her daughter's. Once she became aware of that and she could kind of take her story out, she wasn't as concerned anymore. And then it gave the girl the space and the room to come forward more. So she wasn't like in a power struggle with her mom about it. I had a girl who came to my office when she was in seventh or eighth grade one time. And she was a really high level soccer player. She was playing club soccer and, traveling around and all that. And she came in because a lot of things. But one of the things she came in was that her dad was always on her. He was coaching her from the stands, as some parents are wont to do. Yelling at the coaches, telling her what to do, coaching her from the stands. And then no matter what the score was in the game, no matter how she played, on the car ride home, he coached her all the way home. And it just was driving her crazy. And she had tried to tell him, and he said, yeah, I'm just trying to make you better, blah, 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 blah. And he just wasn't hearing it. So I asked him about his story one day in the office. And his story when he was a kid was this. His parents both worked full time, were uber busy people, and they never went to his games all the way through his childhood, even into early high school. Never went to his games. It really bothered him. And then when he was, I think, a sophomore in high school, he was playing football and he broke his neck and was in traction and all that in the hospital for a while. And he was told he could never play contact sports again. So he felt like he missed out on all of that. And he told himself when he was a kid, someday, if I ever have kids, I will be at their games and I will be supporting them in their athletics. And by God, he was at the games and he was supporting her just too much. But you can see why he might have been on her so much, nagging her at her about how she was playing and all that. Again, his story got intermingled with hers. But the awareness, once he became aware of why he might be triggered and why he might be motivated to do all that, it gave him the ability to then step back a little bit because he realized this is not her story. I've been there all the time. He needed reminders from his daughter periodically, like, Dad, remember, you're not supposed to be yelling from the stands, but he got it and he stopped nagging. I had a girl, and I've had lots of girls, as a matter of fact, in my counseling practice who have told me stories about how their parents sometimes get on them about their weight. And especially girls become sensitive to their dad's comments. I had a girl one time who said her dad came by and pinched her cheeks and said, boy, you're really getting those fat little cheeks now, aren't you? This is like an eighth grade girl. Ugh, that's devastating. Another dad one time pinched his daughter's upper arm. He said, "Boy, you're adding a little bit of weight there, aren't you?" Again, devastated his daughter. And both those dads and others were on them about what they ate. And they would give all these lectures about healthy food. I've had some dads who also got really into their kids' nutrition and diets. I mean, it's okay to talk about things. It's okay to educate. But this was more than that. This was nagging and on them and watching every bite that went in their mouth. And if they had a cookie, then their dad was giving them a lecture about how that wasn't good for them, blah, 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 blah. And every one of the parents that had that story had been overweight as kids. And not just a little overweight, but overweight to the point where it affected them. It affected their social life. It affected their dating life. It affected their friendships. And it affected their self-esteem. They always felt like they were less than. They were teased sometimes. And so because of their experience growing up and being overweight, and some of them were still worried about their weight now as adults, and they were hyper into working out and nutrition. Because of that, they had a hard time not nagging and being too much on their daughters about nutrition and things. Girls are self-conscious enough when they're in middle school, high school, and beyond about how they look and how they're comparing to other people and all that. And so the last thing they need is a mom or a dad, maybe especially a dad, who's on them in a negative kind of way. I've seen also in a related stories of a lot of parents who criticize their daughters' outfits, what they're wearing, especially the ones who are wearing crop tops or in a parent's mind showing too much cleavage, showing too much whatever, midriffs, and being on them and nagging them about it's too sexy, and they're just like asking to be raped or asking to be harassed by boys. And it's a really a tough one for girls to take, because they're 12, 13, 15, 18, and they want to dress how they want to dress. And so when I've talked to those parents, I think, and I've had girls listen to the parents do some mirroring, which I'll talk about at the end of this podcast. Oftentimes what the parents are really saying with the outfits is, "I'm worried about you and your ability to be able to take care of yourself with boys. Are you going to be able to take care of yourself? If you're wearing an outfit that's revealing, you're going to attract boys' eyes. You're going to attract boys' attention, whether you like it or not, and whether it's whatever year it is or not. And even though boys shouldn't, they are. You're going to attract boys' attention in that way. It's not wrong. It's just know it. And be ready to take care of yourself because you may need to. But I think the nagging that comes from parents is them worrying about, is my daughter up to it? Can she set boundaries? Can she take care of herself with guys so that she doesn't get hurt? And we hear all these stories in the news about how many girls get sexually harassed and their boundaries crossed and raped, and especially in high school and college. And I think we're really scared. And I don't blame parents for having some fear, but I think we need to understand and have conversations more about how are you taking care of yourself than criticizing them for what they're wearing. And also along this lines, had a lot of parents, especially I'm going to talk about moms now, moms who get on their daughters, not just about what they're wearing, but about how they look, who sometimes get in their daughters' business about what they're eating and they're not exercising enough and blah, blah, blah. And those girls often will tell me that their daughters talk a lot negatively about their own bodies. I think I've told this story before in a podcast. I'll repeat it now, but my wife and I were running a mother-daughter retreat. These are middle school girls and their moms. I think there were 30 pairs, and this was in Lake Como, Italy. It was awesome. We had girls and their moms from all over Europe. It was so awesome. And at one point, we did a section on body image with the moms and the daughters together. And at one point, we were talking about this necessity of moms being sensitive to what they say to their daughters about their bodies and also about themselves. And all the moms were like, "Oh, no, I would never do that. I would never criticize myself or my daughter. I know better. I understand how hard that is for girls. I would never do that. I got it." And then the girls were sitting there like with their eyes, rolling. We said, "How many of you girls have ever heard your moms talking negatively about their own bodies?" For those of you who don't have a video, my hand's up, and every one of those moms' hands were up in the air. And the moms were like shocked, like, "Really? I didn't know that I was saying things like that." Because sometimes we don't realize what comes out of our mouths. And that kind of talk, whether it's about themselves or their daughters, has a lot of effect on how girls might feel about themselves. A girl might look at her mom and think, "Mom, my mom's got a great shape. My mom looks great," but she's saying that she's fat, or she's saying she's ugly, or she doesn't like the way she looks. Well, if she doesn't like the way she looks, I wonder what people are thinking about me. But moms need to be careful about that. I see a lot of parents of second semester high school seniors getting on them a lot about all kinds of things, about having a messy room to procrastinating with their homework, just all kinds of stuff. And that's one of those touch points I've talked about in previous podcasts. I'll try and remember to put a link to my previous podcast about touch points. The girls are approaching a big transition in their life. That's a touch point, and where they're going to make a big leap in development by doing something. They're going to leave high school and go off into the world in some way. They might go to a trade school, they might go to college, they might join the military, whatever, but they're leaving home, most of them. And so that touch point for the girls is a lot of uncertainty, some anxiety, a lot of mixed feelings. They're up, they're down. It's just, they get all stirred up. They're out of sorts because they're trying to gather the energy to be able to make that leap. At the same time, their parents are also going through a touch point. The little girl is going to be leaving the nest. Have we prepared her well enough? Is she going to be able to take care of herself if she's, 1,000 miles away or 500 miles away or a 2-hour drive away? And so there's lots of emotions for both sides, parents and their daughters. And a lot of times those emotions are not expressed in healthy ways. So it ends up just being anger and struggles and fights and power struggles. I see that so often because people are not aware of what's really going on underneath the surface. I remember one time when my daughter, Kelly, was a high school senior, second semester, my wife, Ann, was watching Oprah, which back then was, the most popular show. Oprah had a guest on who was talking about how women should take care of themselves on college campuses. You should never put your drink down, then come back and drink it, just a bunch of things. And so Ann was watching this and she's like, "Hey, Kelly, get in here. You need to watch this." Ann had been giving Kelly lots of talks about things of that sort. Now, remember, do you know you're not supposed to ever have a drink and then put it down? Yes, Mom, I know that. Plus, you've told me 30 times. So Ann was kind of, quote unquote, nagging here and talking too much about that because of her worries about her going off and would she be able to take care of herself. And so a lot of times our concerns, our fears about our kids going off into the world ends up coming out as being on them, procrastinating about their rooms, like whether or not their room is neat doesn't really have that much to do with how they're going to be in life or they're going to be successful in college or life. But it's just one of those things we feel like we have some control over. And when they go off into the world, we don't have as much control anymore. So sometimes we're trying to find some ways to get some sense of control over our kids, and not control, but like helping them, supporting them to be successful. And sometimes it comes across as nagging about things that aren't really that important. I've seen some parents who overreact to find out that their daughter was drinking at a party. They find a can of beer in their bedroom or whatever. And oftentimes the nagging that parents do about that and the over lecturing, oftentimes is because there's a story in their past. They may have had a parent who had an addiction, a parent who was an alcoholic, or a brother or a sister who went through addiction kinds of problems, and which caused a whole bunch of anxiety and anger and fighting and conflict within the family. And so this mom or dad watched that and said, "Oh my gosh, I don't ever want to have to go through this again. It was horrible." And so now when she finds her daughter drinking, she goes right to, "Oh my gosh, I don't want my daughter ending up like my sister, or like my parents, or like or somebody else in the family." And so we end up doing a lot of lecturing and overreacting and over talking because of our fear, because of our story. I did a podcast a while back about something called Ghosts in the Nursery. I hope some of you listened to that. If not, I'll put that into the podcast. Let me write that down. Ghosts and touch points. Got it. Ghosts in the Nursery are things that happen to us in our childhoods growing up, unresolved issues, unresolved feelings that we bring with us that can haunt us in our parenting. Old stories, if you will. And so sometimes those stories will surface around things like the story I just told about, finding your kid is smoking pot, or your kid was drinking at a party, or that kind of thing. I saw a mom recently who was really pushing her daughter to excel in school. And her daughter was doing fine. And she was pretty independent with herself, but her mom, any little glitch, if her daughter got a C, her mom was like constantly looking at that online portal where she could follow her kid's progress all the way through the school day. And every test grade, every quiz, every whatever would pop up. And if there was a C on a quiz, the mom would immediately, nag at her daughter when she walked in the front door after school, just doing too much and over worried because her daughter had it together, in my view. And this mother's story, when I asked her about her past, was that she didn't do very well in school, and she felt like her parents never really encouraged her. They were busy. She was a girl, and her parents were much more involved in her brother's academics than hers, because back in that day, that's what happened. And so this mom had never been encouraged, and she just kind of drifted her way through school. And then I think she tried a semester of college and then dropped out because she wanted some money or something. And then in her mind, she had feelings about she shouldn't have done that, a lot of regret. And she felt like because of her lack of education that she had to settle for jobs that she didn't like. jobs that were boring. And it was so she didn't want that for her daughter. She wanted her daughter to have the best opportunities. She wanted to have more opportunities than she has and she had. And so on her daughter. On and on and on 24/7, if you will. And it's also the other thing I've learned in talking to parents, listening to parents, is that it's hard sometimes for parents to know how to support their kids academically because the world and the world of jobs and things is so much different than our experience, so much different than it was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so sometimes it's hard to know how to support our kids. And so sometimes our support becomes over support because of our fear about is he or she going to be successful. So one more quick story. I saw this girl about 2 or 3 months ago. She had a sad story because she was living with her grandparents, and her mom, when she was a little girl, when she was 4 or 5, just suddenly took off. She had addiction problems, drug problems, and she was somewhere on the East Coast for like 4 years, almost no contact with her daughter, almost no phone calls, just kind of dropped out of her life. So this girl went and lived with her grandparents, and they were pretty elderly too. Her grandfather had early onset Alzheimer's. And so then all of a sudden, when this girl was about 10, her mom partially came back in her life. Then her mom moved back when she was in middle school. And then this mom was nagging a lot, was on her a lot. She was over-parenting because of her guilt. She felt so bad that she had been gone those years. She had a lot of remorse about that. And this girl who had sort of learned to take care of herself, she had a grandmother who had parented her, but her grandmother was distracted a lot with her husband and all that. So this girl kind of learned to kind of make her own way, take care of herself. Now, all of a sudden, her mom is swooping in and trying to overparent her. And she's like, oh, hello, time out. Where have you been for the last 6 years? I've been taking care of myself. So no, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not sure she ever exactly said those words, but that's what her actions and her attitude was about. And it made a lot of sense to me. And her mom was overparenting because of her guilt. Again, the story under the surface that sometimes triggers us to nag, get on our kids too much, to overparent, if you will. So I work with girls a lot in my counseling practice, also in my retreats and my summer camps, to learn how to deal with their parents differently. Because when their parents are nagging or on them, a lot of times the girl's reaction makes it worse. They yell at their parents. They get into a power struggle. They shut down. You can't make me do my homework. You think you can be on me, nag, but you know what? I won't turn it in, or I won't try in the tests. So a lot of times the girls end up shooting themselves in the foot as a way of trying to gain some sense of control. And so what I encourage them to do instead is listen to their parents. Why are you so concerned? I hear you're concerned about me wearing this outfit. I don't understand. Tell me why. And when the parent says, well, blah, 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 I tell the girls, just mirror them. Don't argue. Don't interrupt. Just give them a time to give you a paragraph and then say, so what I heard you say is you're worried about me because you think this is going to attract boys' attention and I might end up getting hurt. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Tell me more. I don't get it. Well, I've seen all these stories in the news lately about college campuses, blah, blah. So anyway, if a girl can mirror their parent like that, what ends up happening to the parent's energy usually is it dissipates. It starts going down. And then as they're unlayering, if you will, they can end up oftentimes getting to, this is the real issue. I'm worried because my father was an alcoholic. I don't want there's a family history. I went through this with my sister. I was overweight my whole middle school and high school years. I had a hard time with being teased, not having friends. I don't want the same thing for you. That helps for girls to go, oh, okay, I get it. That makes sense why you have so much energy about this, when I don't think you need to. It doesn't mean you agree with them. It just means I understand you better. That's a huge piece for girls and boys to learn to understand why their parents might be nagging. Something more than the obvious. It's not about your messy room. It's not about you didn't turn a homework assignment in. There's oftentimes something a little bit more important, deep underneath the nagging. Now, if they can get that, they can understand better, then they're less likely to react and be triggered by it. It also helps if parents can learn before they have the talk with their daughter about your room is so messy or they're not turning their homework in or I don't like your outfit, to first, for them, when they can sense they're being triggered in some way and they're starting to get some energy up, to take a quick break and check in and say, what's going on? Why am I so worried about this? You can learn to in a sense, have some self-reflection about there might be an issue here that's causing me to be so upset by this. My daughter is reacting. We're getting into power struggles. I don't want that. So let me check in and see if I have an issue about this. anything I can uncover that I can then have some awareness about and then maybe watch my energy. So that self-reflection would be really important. Sometimes when I'm working with girls in camps and retreats and in my office, I used to do this with adults when my wife and I years and years ago would run weekend retreats for adults. We would say, have your daughter in mind, or have this person who gets under your skin in mind, and then fill in the blanks. What I see in my daughter, what I see in another person, that I also see in me is fill in the blanks. I used to be triggered by guys who I thought were being cocky, guys who, in my mind, were too out there, cocky, too assertive in my mind. And then I became aware at a retreat a long time ago that I became aware of that when I was a kid growing up. It wasn't okay to ask for things. I had 7 siblings and there was no extra money. If I wore hand-me-downs from my 2 older brothers for my whole life. And sometimes they had holes in the bottom of my football cleats and things. And if I asked for a new pair of football shoes, I got lots of stories about, who do you think your father is? Nelson Rockefeller. You think money grows on trees? So I kind of interpreted that as saying, if you were a good boy, you wouldn't ask. You would just keep quiet and just kind of, go along. I grew up with a scarcity mentality. There's just not enough. So if I saw people now as an adult who were really good at asking for what they wanted, who were very assertive, sometimes aggressive, assertive, whatever, I interpret that as being too much. And what I saw in those guys who were being assertive and out there was, I wish I was more like that. Because I can see how I became aware of how sometimes it was holding me back. And I wish I was more like that. So instead of saying to myself, wow, I need to work on that issue, I need to start taking care of my scarcity mentality, what I said was, what a jerk. I pointed the finger away from me at them until I became aware on a retreat one time what was going on. And then I pointed the finger at me and said, I need to work at being more assertive. I need to start learning to ask for what I want. At my needs, it's okay for me to have some needs. So the same thing may happen for you. There may be something your daughter is triggering in you, like you wish you were more like them, like your daughter is very outgoing and puts herself out there and she sets boundaries, and you sometimes may criticize her for being too bossy when in reality what you're saying is, wow, I wish I was more assertive like that, or whatever it might be. So try to uncover maybe what is going on that's triggering you about your daughter, the way they act, the way they behave, the way they look, or whatever. And then check in with yourself and say, is this something I need to clean up about me? Because when I cleaned up the part about asking for what I wanted and I started doing a way better job of that, those guys didn't trigger me anymore because it wasn't about them. They were just mirroring something about me. And that's something that you can do with your daughters. Like, because of my energy around this, she's mirroring something to me that I might want to learn about myself. Either I might want to be more like that, or she's reminding me of my younger sister who was like that and then got in lots of trouble. There's something there that's about us, and get clear about that. Also, sometimes it's not what we say to our kids, it's how we say it and how many times we say it. So our tone of voice, our mood, our range, if you will, is important. I teach parents of kids to adopt what I call my wife and I's discipline mantra. And it goes like this: agreements with immediate, kind, firm follow through with no game. Agreements being made with your sons and daughters, giving them input, talking things through until you get a clear agreement. And then when the time comes, it's immediate, kind, firm follow through without games. And the games is the nagging part, the reminding part. You follow through because we've already talked this through. I'm not willing to talk about it or argue about it. You follow through, and you avoid all of the nagging and the yelling and the going on and on and on. And you leave that out, but you follow through. And that's one way to avoid nagging. Is you don't need to, because you've given yourself the time up front to get clear about the agreement. Now the talking's over. Now it's just about following through with your boundaries. And that could be an important step for parents to help them avoid the nagging. So I hope this helps for you. If you have a lot of energy about some issue around your daughter, if you end up overparenting or talking too much or nagging, reminding and all that, then besides just the discipline part about the ineffectiveness of the nagging and the teaching kids about it takes 6 times before I mean it. It's also, I think, sometimes there's a deeper issue involved. Something that's causing us to be over worried. It brings up fears about our kids. And we tend to sometimes do too much, talk too much, overparent because of that. So when you catch that energy, check in with yourself. What's this about for me? Like that dad at that talk who realized, wow, this is about, I just miss my daughter. So instead of going to her and saying, you're always up in your room and you're never with the family, instead he could sit her down and say, I miss you. I know you're a teenager and I know you want to spend time with your room. I get it. And I want some time too. How can we create that? I think if you came across in that way, I think your daughter would listen And then you guys could have a conversation about ways you could connect. So take care of your issue. If it's about you were overweight as a kid, then handle your self-image issue now, and don't add that to your daughter's plate. Don't add the too shy thing to their plate. Keep your story with you so that it doesn't cause you to have too much energy about their issue. I heard a story one time about this mom who wanted her daughter to come in the kitchen for something. And so she said, honey, come in the kitchen. Honey, come in the kitchen. Honey, I said, come in the kitchen. And then her daughter, the little kid, walks in the kitchen. She says, sorry, Mom, I didn't hear you the first 2 times. That's a kid who has been trained to need 3 reminders. So don't do that. Stop nagging, stop reminding, do more self-reflection, do more learning about you and what you might be bringing to the party. Take care of that. And I think you'll find that you won't need to do all the reminding and the nagging. So hope this helps. This might be a good one to pass on to your friends because we all nag. I think we all at different times do too much talking, too much nagging, over worry, sometimes overparent, micromanage. We've talked about like that in some previous podcasts, helicopter parent. We're all sick of hearing about that. And there's some truth to it. So take care of yourself, take care of your parts. And I think you'll make your parenting a lot more fun, less draining. You'll have more quality time instead of nagging time. I will be back here in a week with a brand new podcast. I will put a link for the Touch Points podcast and also the Ghost in the Nursery podcast in my show notes. So make sure you look at those on our website. My website, by the way, is just DR, like doctor, drtimjordan.com. So check that out for the show notes with those links. Also, you'll find information there about the 6 books that I've written. All the previous podcasts are on there. You also see some videos, little short videos about different topics I've done. Also, there's a whole page for our summer camps, weekend retreats. So all the stuff that we do is on the website. So check it out at drtimjordan.com. And I appreciate you coming by, especially you people who are as far away as Australia and Ireland and other places around the world. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be back here in a week.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Raising Daughters. Hopefully you've learned something useful about girls and young women and how to help them navigate the pressures, challenges, and opportunities of modern life. If you want to become a more effective parent, keep listening to the show at drtimjordan.com and let the conversations shape you. Build that one-of-a-kind connection with your daughters in the most profound and meaningful ways possible, shaping them into strong, confident women of the future. That's all for now. See you next week for another episode of Raising Daughters.